So yeah, like you said, I'm a psychotherapist. I have a background in psychology consulting. Before that, I worked for a personal development program that was international from the United States and Canada.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Business Ninjas. I'm here today with Bri Larson. She's a psychotherapist at Counseling at the Core. Bri, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Yeah, excited to have you. So Bri, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So yeah, like you said, I'm a psychotherapist. I have a background in psychology consulting. Before that, I worked for a personal development program that was international from the United States and Canada. Yeah, I offer just regular mental health counseling and therapy, both online and in person. And I also do trauma coaching as well. So I dabble into the coaching realm with a lot to do with mental health, ADHD, trauma, PTSD, stress, anxiety, all of those fun things. So
Yeah. That's a lot. There, you've got a very wide specialty, I hear. So talk to me a little bit about kind of how you found yourself at Counseling at the Core.
yeah, so like I said, I years ago worked for a personal development program. I guess you'd say it started for me when I was in high school. My high school offered psychology courses. And then from there, you could also take the advanced placement to do your first year of university while you're still in high school.
Yeah.
And that appealed to me just to get ahead of the curve and whatnot. So I took my first year of psychology courses at my high school and then continued on in university. And it just fascinated me that you could figure out how human beings operate, what hinders them, what motivates them and whatnot. And, I really feel like I had a lot of figuring out to do of myself. And in doing so, I was just kind of able to garner a wide variety of knowledge that could help others as well. And being a helper is in my nature. So it just kind of fit together perfectly. So that I went on to work for that personal development seminar for 7 years or so. And then over COVID and whatnot, they kind of got dismantled. In-person experiential seminars weren't permitted at that time. So it gave me a nice transition to switch over to counseling and therapy. And then I went private practice, and my home office is the Core. So offering both, like I said, the therapeutic services for therapy and counseling that's covered by benefits and insurers. But also, if you don't have that, I also offer that trauma coaching.
Yeah.
That, my style tends to differ from most therapists. A lot of therapists are just there to hold space for you. They're just there to, be someone for you to vent to in a safe environment that is confidential and not going anywhere. And a lot of the time, their focus is on allowing you to find your own answers. My experience has been that if you're coming to a counselor, it's because you don't know what the answers are. You want to know what some options are for you to try to get past whatever hurdle is stopping you at that point. So,
Yeah.
I tend to be a little bit more direct, a little bit more assertive in my answers and whatnot. And so far, my clients seem to appreciate that approach.
Yeah. So are your clients, are they kids? Are they adults? Talk to me a little bit about kind of who you see.
Yeah. So my demographic is typically 18 plus. I will see teenagers if they tend to be a little bit more mature and they're dealing with, things that aren't interpersonal kind of issues when it comes to developmental challenges. But if it has to do with if there's like a 15, 16, 17-year-old that's got trauma or PTSD or OCD or whatnot, and they're able to adopt and follow, sort of procedures for ways to get that, then I can work with them. But typically, I do work with mostly adults. I have a lot of people who have trauma and PTSD. That's my specialty.
Yeah.
So a lot of people that have been through therapy before and just find that they're getting stuck or that talk therapy itself isn't working for them. A lot of people who, are really stuck in the somatic experience of trauma and whatnot. There's a lot of things that happen throughout your body where trauma gets stuck, stress gets stuck, and you end up with muscle aches. You end up with, certain diseases and whatnot that tend to develop from chronic stress, chronic cortisol reabsorption and whatnot. So, mostly adults that are really in the realm of being pretty stuck. But then I also get, I'd say your average couples that are having interpersonal issues with their relationship, that sort of thing, or just regular stresses of, day-to-day life. At the end of the day, it all boils down to fairly similar issues, that it's a fairly similar way that you get through them when it comes to trauma coaching. So,
And what do you mean by that?
if you know anything about the nervous system, trauma is stored in your nervous system. And the somatic therapies that I teach my clients is the number one way to rid yourself of your reaction and get out of activation and into rest. And if you can retrain your nervous system to do that, you can pretty well eliminate a lot of the symptoms, which are coming across as the issues and whatnot. Most people can notice where things are in their way, or when they're having some, a reaction to something, or they're having something that they don't like, but they don't really know how to find their way to what the actual origin of it is.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people, and especially as of lately, a lot of people self-diagnosing as ADHD when they're just, they don't have the actual chemical imbalance to account for clinical ADHD, but they are having activation types of responses of their nervous system, which to the untrained eye comes across as ADHD. In reality, you're dealing with something that's stressing your nervous system, and you're reacting in a way that's either hypervigilant or trouble focusing or what have you. And you're missing the mark. So you could be medicating for something that you don't actually have, and it's causing you more issues in your life than what you actually realize. Your body will then go into no longer creating the dopamine that you're looking for, because you're giving yourself a synthetic hit of it every time you take your medication in the morning, and you're creating more of a deficit and more of a problem for yourself. So actually getting in and learning the holistic somatic ways to calm your nervous system not only can save you the cost of the medication, but it can save you time and years on your life, because if you end up dealing with all of the extra side effects that happen when you take undue medications and what have you, then it can end up being more detrimental than good.
Yeah. So kind of talking about counseling on the core, you've got phenomenal insight, and I appreciate you sharing all of that, because certainly I think a lot of our listeners aren't well versed in the nervous system, or kind of understanding why things work the way that they are, and kind of your mind and body reactions to your environment. So I appreciate you kind of like breaking that down for us. But how have you, besides from being, great, how have you been able to grow counseling at the core?
Yeah, so I have been offering counseling at the core now for a year out of this office. And honestly, the interwebs is a fantastic place. I find that most of my referrals come from within my office. The majority of them come from within my office. And then from there, I get quite a few people who follow me on TikTok. And then I'd say the other handful of them come from either random referrals from word of mouth or whatnot, and on Psychology Today. If you're looking for a counselor and you want one that's in your area, Psychology Today lists them by region. If you don't need to utilize benefits and you're paying out of your own pocket, then you can search through Psychology Today and find whoever it is that will fit your needs the best.
So what would you say one of the biggest challenges that your clients have before they meet you? Is it kind of just overall, not necessarily understanding certain things, or, needing someone to talk to? Talk to me about some of the main challenges that you see.
Yeah, I would say that there's a couple that come up pretty regularly. The first one being just never having spoken to someone else about their problems before. Just the stigma around mental health is still very real. I find that baffling. Being who I am, I absolutely love honest, vulnerable, in-depth conversation. So for me, I don't find that personally.
But definitely a lot of my clients, upon their first visit, they've either spoken to one counselor one time before and didn't really do anything with it, or they felt uncomfortable for whatever reason, or, there were coworkers making fun of them, especially if you're male. It seems like the stigma is still very much real for them. Women have kind of surpassed it a little bit faster, I think, than the men have, but we tend to be creatures who like to communicate more
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And other than that, I would say it's just honestly, they don't know where to look. They have no idea where to find the answers or what they're looking at. So, yeah, my biggest piece of advice for anyone who's looking for an affordable way to just kind of start to figure themselves out is read. Read as much as you can. Read books, read self-help books, listen to podcasts, just consume the knowledge any way that you can. Audiobooks, same thing, any way that you can get more information in is always going to better your situation. The more you know, the better you can grow. And the next part is develop impeccable self-awareness. If you can figure out how your body is trying to talk to you and actually tune into it, you know where to focus your energy on, making tweaks and figuring out why you operate the way you do.
So kind of talking about stigmas, what would you say the biggest misconception that people have either about counseling at the core or mental health in general? What would you say that would be? Or seeking help rather even too?
That there's something wrong with you. By far, that is probably the worst stigma I've ever heard of, is that, well, you're going to talk to someone. What's wrong with you? Like, nothing. I'm just a flawed human. We're supposed to be flawed. We would all be exactly the same. And how boring a world would that be? That would mean that there's no artists out there. There's no music to be made, like which path do we follow if you're going to deem there to be some form of normalcy out there?
Yeah.
The fact that we're diverse and that we're different means that we're all going to hit different challenges at different times. And there's nothing wrong with that. Also, we're meant to be communal. We're meant to communicate with each other. That's why that saying exists. It takes a village to raise a child, because it takes more than one person to shape your perspective around how you live your life and what you're doing in this world. So talking to someone and getting a more general opinion on, am I doing things right? Have I gone far off course? All you're doing in therapy is just gaining clarity on what you already want for your life. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of figuring out, you probably have an idea. You just need a little bit of help, like pruning the hedges around, well, this is just fluff. Let's get down to the nitty.
Yeah. So you talked about, being able to utilize the psychologists near me, kind of that psychologist today, to figure out there's psychotherapist around you. Why would someone choose to come to you? What differentiates you from other psychotherapists in the area?
Yeah. So like I said, I do operate fairly different. Typically when you go and see a counselor or a therapist, like I said, they would hold space for you, which means that they're there to give you their undivided attention and their unconditional positive regard, which means regardless of what you say you've done, I can see a reason or a way that you got to that point and you justified it for yourself, and I'm not going to judge you for that. Everyone has done things that they regret or that they wish they hadn't done or that they're not proud of. We've all got things in our past that we wish we could take back. Some of them are big, some of them are small. It doesn't really matter. We're not comparing you to anyone. We're just here to help you, again, to figure out, well, how did it get there? Do we want to prevent that in the future, or do we want to just tweak it a little bit so that it can work for you and your benefit? So yeah, like I said, most therapists are just going to hold the space for you to vent to them and help you to figure it out a little bit. I have more of a coaching perspective where I tend to be a little bit more direct. I still have compassion and empathy for people, and you're going to feel that from me. But I'm also going to call you on the areas where I see that you've widely stepped out of line. If you are the type that you deal well with the A-type assertive personalities, that is I. And so I also give homework. I want people to gain as much value from the sessions as possible. I don't want to just be someone who sees you and you're just another paycheck for me, right? Like I care about my clients and I want them to get the most benefit in a timely manner as well. So if I see that I can give you, a book and an exercise and, an assignment to do after our session, you spend the majority of time outside of our sessions. You only spend 50 minutes typically within a session with me. And you're not going to change your entire self in a 50-minute per week session. You're going to do the majority of the work actually in practice out in the real world after the fact. So, I tend to be just a little bit more hands-on, a little bit more assertive than your typical therapist.
And why do you think it's so important that you are so active online and like encouraging people to engage with different mediums outside of your office?
I think honestly, the online portion of it, for me, it keeps me relevant. I like to know what are people dealing with right now, and it's going to be different as we develop, as society grows and whatnot, because the things that we dealt with even just 10 years ago, some of those are no longer relevant anymore. So if I'm still studying the same thing to try and solve that problem, I've made myself irrelevant. If you stay in touch with what the masses are doing, at least I can stay fairly relevant to the clientele that I prefer to serve, which, I'd say about 20, 30 years ago, there was a lot of people in PTSD land that were coming out of, the military and whatnot. Now, the majority of people with PTSD are coming out of narcissistic relationships. So that's a very wide switch from what was to now what is. And if you're not online, if you're not staying relevant, then I would still be studying based on the military servicemen and women.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure, like you said, the trends of what you see have changed. And I imagine, too, COVID has had an effect on the different mental health things that you've seen change over the past few months.
COVID was actually super fascinating from a psychology standpoint because there was quite a lot of people who were masking, which means that they were essentially acting a certain way to garner whatever attention it is that they wanted while doing a disservice to who they truly were. There was a lot of people masking that had an opportunity to finally take that off and stop doing the activities that weren't really serving them, that they were pulling out the effort from a place that didn't actually exist. And they finally got a break. The introverts finally had permission to introvert. And then the exact opposite, where if you found that you were fairly extroverted or you did thrive in social settings and whatnot, you had to figure out a way to do that from home. And so making people ultra creative in the way that they took care of themselves was fascinating to watch. Like I said, the beginning one for me, I found to be the most fascinating, of just giving people permission to actually be those quieter individuals or those people that preferred to stay homebodies and whatnot. That one for me, I found to be just, I loved that part of, COVID itself obviously was horrendous. No one loved it. But if you're going to have those silver linings and whatnot, that would be my favorite part of COVID.
Yeah, yeah. And I imagine too, I find it also very interesting, and not that I'm looking forward to seeing the effects of COVID over the next generation, 2 generations, or like longitudinally, but I think it'll be very interesting to see.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
So it affected businesses and whatnot. The majority of people, maybe not the majority, but for those 2 years or so, the majority of people went remote. And there's a lot of that was beneficial, that has stuck around. I would say that probably 80% of my sessions are virtual.
Yeah.
Only 20% are in person, whereas it was the opposite beforehand,
Right.
Remote sessions were only just coming in. Only a handful of service providers offering that. Now being able to access counseling, mental health services, literally from wherever. I have international clients, some in Costa Rica, some in the United States, some in Canada, some when they travel, they still keep in contact. That I find that to be a blessing. Thank you again from COVID.
Yeah. So it's made counseling more accessible, more relevant, and more accepted, I would say.
I would say it also, it opened the door to talk about mental health issues because absolutely everyone was going squirrely at the beginning. So we had to introduce like, hey, are you feeling a little bit weird? talk to someone. And
Yeah.
it did open the door for the stigma to be, I'd say it brushed off a lot of that.
Absolutely. So, Bri, kind of as we wrap up, if you wanted to leave our listeners with one piece of information, either about mental health counseling, psychotherapy, counseling at the core, what would you want to leave our listeners with?
One thing? Oh, geez.
How about two?
There's so many. I mean, like I said, just consume as much knowledge as possible. If you don't necessarily. Okay, I'll talk about labels. A lot of people are anti-label. They're afraid that they're going to be labeled as something. They're going to be labeled anxious. They're going to be labeled borderline. They're going to be labeled as a narcissist, what have you. Don't be afraid of the label, because it doesn't mean, number one, it doesn't mean it's permanent. And number two, it's not a life sentence. If you do receive a label, all that means is that you've now got a name of something that you can buckle down and gather more information on how you can help yourself to live a better life, live an easier life. You can find the ways that other people who have the same condition as you have gone wrong and how they fixed it. You know, there might be something that's super simple that if you know what it is that you're dealing with, then you can, you know, it just makes it a lot easier to figure yourself out.
Yeah.
In the same sense, I also want to caution against self-labeling, because just because you found something that you think fits doesn't mean it technically does. There's a lot of overlapping symptoms, and I said one of them earlier. So borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder have a lot of overlapping symptoms. They're not the same thing, though. And if you mislabel yourself as one and not the other, you could be missing out on a whole category. So just make sure that you are not self-labeling what is not obviously or potentially something else, and make sure that you're at least go for the diagnosis with a trusted professional. Doesn't mean that you have to stick with them and do the work that way. If it's, you know, out of pocket or whatnot, then again, turn to books, turn to YouTube, turn to all the self-help options that are free or almost free. Make sure that diagnosis is correct first.
Yeah. And I think you raised a bunch of really good points about being okay with labels, but not self-labeling. And I think it's really important to have that, you know, that difference, but also know that you have people like you to reach out to be able to coach you through this, to be able to, you know, talk you through what you may be feeling, because although it's not normal, it's, you know, we're living in a world of new normal. That's what somebody called it before. So kind of living with that new normal, and having resources like you that they know they can reach out to, having, you know, consuming different knowledge and consuming different media is so important.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Bri, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on Business Ninjas today. This has been a really great conversation about psychotherapy and counseling at the core. So I appreciate you again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.